Hey, last part of chapter 3 notes. What are we? 13. Just kidding. 13. Seems to be paying attention. Last part of chapter 13 notes. Chapter 13 is about measuring the economy. Let me move. And I'm going to fly through these notes. We've had these in previous videos. Measuring the economy, the main way we do that is gross domestic product, or GDP, total amount of stuff we make in an economy in a year, goods and services, final goods and services, right? What GDP look like over time, what has looked like over time, comparison with the countries. We're number one, USA. We can measure the economy in other ways. Almost all of it's done with dollars. Dollars, prices of things change over time. And so we got to figure out, gee, what is inflation there? So CPI is the main way we do that. That should be familiar to us, what inflation has looked like over time. We also talked about aggregate demand, aggregate supply. Hopefully that rings a bell. And the equilibrium price of aggregate demand, aggregate supply is the same thing as our GDP, which is a little over $20 trillion, best estimate. Okay, so we have our two last slides, which will culminate our chapter 13 notes here, right? So most economists, most people, most government leaders would argue that increasing GDP growth over time is good. Yeah. So someone running for president is Democrat. He's going to argue like, oh, I'll make sure our economy grows. Always about the economy growing, more jobs, more money, more stuff. And the Republican's going to say, no, they're going to trash it all. We're, elect us because we're going to make the economy grow because we'll do this, this, and this, which is different than those guys, and our policies are better. Anyway, they argue, right? But they're arguing about the same end result. They say that we have different ways to get there, right? The lower taxes, higher taxes, taxes on these people, no those people. But fundamentally, almost all of our sort of policies in this country are aimed at increasing GDP. And that's not just us, that's everywhere in the world. That's not just now, that's been always. And it's a little interesting there, right? Because do you know who is sort of opposed to constantly acquiring more material stuff? Jesus and Buddha and almost every human religion ever and most life philosophies have really sort of, at their core been about getting rid of wanting more stuff, right? Greed is not good. More material items bad. Give all your stuff away. The poor shall inherit the earth. On and on. And then almost no humans ever lived that way, right? Now, I think we're at a time in 2020, not even counting COVID, thanks COVID, where environmentally, we are really, some of us coming to, some societies, some people, some movements, coming to really wonder if constantly increasing GDP is really a sustainable way to live on this planet. Now, that's a question for a different class or time or whatever, but it's worth keeping in the back of our minds, I think, right? But anyway, if the goal has always been, and in most people's cases, government's cases, society, is still to increase GDP over time, well, is that what's always happened? Has our GDP increased over time always? Like, hallelujah, right? And in a lot of ways, over time, yes, we have more stuff than they did during World War II. And people living in 1940s America or Japan or Kenya had more stuff overall than when Nebuchadnezzar was running around, the Fertile Crescent or wherever he lived. Overall societies, we have had more stuff over time. Now, of course, like the richest guy ever was Mansa Musa, they say, who even had more than Bill Gates or Bezos or whomever, right? But overall, society-wise, yeah, we as countries, as peoples collectively, have over time, brief periods of the Great Depression, 2009, the first half of 2020, thanks Corona, our economy has shrunk. In any period over more than 4 or 5 years, and that's only a handful of times like Depression, our economy has grown. And when we say our economy has grown, we simply mean GDP has gone up. We've made more stuff overall measured in dollars with inflation factored out. So we know it's a real measurement. We've actually grown 3 apples instead of 2, or made 100 cars instead of 40, or whatever it is, right? So point being, if everyone agrees this is the proper goal, make more stuff, is that what's always happened? Absolutely not. all human societies over time seem to have really been a party to, victim of the business cycle. Yeah. So this sense of our notes, there is a business cycle, that there is a cyclical up and down measurement over time. In effect, a sine wave. I'm going to try to draw this on the screen, but I'm sure I'll just screw it up. We're going to go for it. We're going to go for it. This is the business cycle. I'm a really outstanding artist, as you can tell. This is the business cycle. Woo, look at me. Over time. Up and down. This is when GDP is increasing. This is when GDP is decreasing. Now, it has not looked exactly like this, but interestingly, Coca-Cola as a corporation tends to face a cyclical nature of how much money it makes, profit cycle over time. The United States government tends to have lived throughout a business cycle over time. I'll screw this all up, I guess. Anyway, I give up because I'm not the tech guy, right? But if we, in fact, had lived in a system, a society where we were just a flat business cycle, this chart itself over here and over here, the start point and the end point, well, more like here, but the start point and the end point are the same, right? Through this. That would mean if over here you started at a certain level of GDP, over here you end at the same level of GDP. That's not how it has worked for the United States. That's not how it worked for most civilizations over time, right? We started over here and we end way up here. That in fact, the way our, come back to me. No, that's not what I want. Look, it all stayed. It's exciting. The way, go back to pen. Go to this thing again. The way it has worked instead is we've had this business cycle, but it's been on an inclined plane. That we still face a business cycle of ups and downs, but overall, on average, we have gone up in this country. Now, that is not to say that always happens, right? So Rome did that for a very long time and then didn't. Nor Greece, same deal, right? So lots of civilizations that have come and gone over several millennia of us hanging out on this planet have not captured constant, continual GDP growth. Now, the American experiment of the last 200 years has managed to pull this off broadly. Who knows where the future holds, yeah? But anyway, when you are on an increasing plane, when you are going up, economically speaking, that's fun. We can label some of those ups and downs. I'll go back and draw a brief business cycle here, right? And we can label some of these ups and downs with these terms. So recession and depression simply are when you're down, decreasing, like that's a recession, that's a recession, that's a recession. And when you have a terrible recession, well, that's just called a depression, simply just meaning GDP is contracting over time. What about a recovery and an expansion, those next two terms? Well, that obviously is just when GDP is growing. And a trough is when you're at the very bottom of your business cycle, right? So the business cycle is just a cyclical nature roller coaster of GDP increasing or decreasing over time. But what causes the business cycle? What makes stuff go up and go down, and why do we care? Well, if you'd like to have more stuff over time as a person or a society, if you'd like to go look for a job when you graduate from college in an increasing economy, so there are lots more jobs available, that those jobs have raises associated with them and so on. Well, governments, people, individuals, corporations tend to really care about the business cycle and what causes it to go up and down. So our text, go through and read it, discusses what causes changes in the business cycle. Business investment, government activity, external factors, and psychological factors. Hey, there's a war, like, World War II. Guess what happens to the economy? People freak out, scared, right? We're going to not buy stuff. On the other hand, the government starts writing blank checks for aircraft carriers and tanks. So different factors could increase the business cycle up or down, right? Associated with, say, war. After 9/11, the economy shrunk rather dramatically for a period of time because people freaked. I'm not going to go out to eat dinner. I'm not going to go see movies. We're not going to start that new line of Ford pickup trucks because we don't think people will buy them because, oh my gosh, what's going to happen on September 12th and 13th and October and So anyway, psychological factors and fear can cause the economy to go down. Or of course, if everyone's feeling wonderful, roaring 20s, everything will be better tomorrow. That's when people tend to take risks, buy stuff, expand your factories and plant. Anyway, your economy will tend to grow. Government activity, as we just mentioned, sort of with war, but also level of taxation, you name it, can impact economic growth. And just naturally, what tends to happen is Coca-Cola will say, hey, let's build a new factory and take a risk. And we think people are into this Coke thing. Let's make some more of it. After they build that factory and make a lot more Coke, guess what? They tend to not make a brand another new factory immediately. Yeah, so they tend to go up GDP wise, just themselves, Coca-Cola, making more Coke, seeing if it'll sell. Brand new flavor, vanilla Coke. Let's make a bunch of stick it on shelves. But now let's hold up, right? And wait 6 months and see. And so you sort of naturally build in that downward cycle of lack of new investment until you get to a point where you say, like, well, gee, maybe we'll try cherry Coke. Will that make people come back and buy? And invest in new plant, change stuff around, spend some money. Anyway, and so there's a sort of just seems to be over time, all societies, China, us, 100 years ago today, a natural ebb and flow, up and down sine wave curve of the business cycle. If you can put that ebb and flow, the up and down cycle on an inclined plane over time, well, most countries, most societies say, hey, that's what we want to do. That's a win. Environmentally, maybe that's a catastrophe. Jesus and Buddha might disagree, but anyway. So those are causes of business cycle changes. Our last bit of notes on chapter 13 are about economic indicators, and there are three main branches of indicators. There are leading indicators, there, coincident indicators, there, leading, coincident, and lagging. Those are our three main kinds. And really all that means is the different ways that these indicators, what they're telling us about GDP, what it really means if I'm looking at the stock market, say, for what the economy is going to do. So a leading indicator simply means something that's happening today that tells me what GDP is going to be like in the future. A coincident indicator is something I can look at right now today that tells me what's happening with GDP right now today. And a lagging indicator is something that tells me this is what is happening with GDP yesterday or 6 months ago. I like to think of this as weather related. I mean, an analogy is weather in my mind, right? So if I know that the weather in Kansas today is super rainy, my guess is that we'll have rainy weather tomorrow. That weather will come out of the west and hit us. If I walk outside in the morning and I step in a puddle, I know it rained overnight, lagging indicator puddle. And a coincident indicator would be if I stick my head out the window and it gets wet, oh, well, I know it's raining right now, right? So anyway, so those three types of broad speaking indicators. So what are our main leading indicators? What's happening today that I can look at that tells me what the economy is going to be like in the future? The most important main one that people tend to point to is the stock market. So if stock market is going up today, that does not mean the economy is great today, but it means those people buying stocks and selling stocks think the economy is going to be great 6 months from now. Roughly, it's about a 6 month time lag is what they claim. The stock market is supposed to reflect economic growth in the future to the tune of about 6 months, right? New unemployment claims are another one of those economic indicators that you can find today that really should tell you what the economy is going to be like in a month or so. Coincident indicators, boy, the economy stinks. What can I look at to prove that? The unemployment rate is one of those. So COVID, thanks COVID, unemployment rate shot up to almost 15%, about the highest it's ever been in the United States history, except for the Great Depression, probably. And that tells us our economy stinks right now. But it doesn't tell me the economy stinks in 6 months. So anyway, we'll see where we go from here. And then lagging indicators tend to not be as important economically, but tend to sort of confirm what, if you come out with a GDP figure and say, we're a $20 trillion economy and we shrunk from a $21 trillion economy a year ago, is that really right? Well, if your lagging indicators 6 months after you say that really start to point to a 20 trillion versus $21 trillion economy, then you can start confirming like, oh yeah, all those ways we sort of estimate the GDP of this country are probably correct. So anyway, not quite as important. The very last section of chapter 13 covers those leading, lagging, and coincident indicators better too. So, read them. Those people are a lot smarter than I am. and it'll help you understand that if you don't. So, anyway, that concludes our chapter 13 notes. I told you this would be short, and it wasn't because I'm a liar. I always try. I always have that goal in mind. I'm going to try better on chapter 14. But any questions on chapter 13? Ask me.